just watch you. Cool. Hi, everyone. So nice to be here, and thank you, Tom, for this opportunity. Tom is really wonderful, and this is such an amazing community of people here. My name is Aditya. I am currently the co-founder and CEO of Inspirit, but previously I did my PhD in the learning sciences. I'm an education researcher and education entrepreneur. I was at Stanford. I was Jeremy Bailenson student, and then incubated and built the idea for Inspirit when I was working with him. Prior to that, I actually spent a few years working with the Google education team on Google Cardboard in its very first iteration, when there was a platform called Google Expeditions that was taken into schools and classrooms. I was 19 years old back then. I was the youngest researcher on the research team, and I was taking these cardboard headsets into hundreds of schools of all shapes and sizes, and noticed some very troubling trends with the way in which a lot of engineers and tech bros like me were building and deploying these devices in classrooms. That inspired me to really dive into the research on the learning sciences front and ask some very difficult questions around what do we know about VR and learning? What do we really know about how this drives learning outcomes? And I started working at a time in 2018 or 17 on research, so to the left of that inflection point that Jeremy talked about, and I made it my mission and commitment to read every single paper on VR and learning, and really tried to unpack what people meant by learning, what types of outcomes. There was almost no sophistication at that point of time in really explaining and understanding the nuances behind the pedagogies of what actually happened in classrooms. And a lot of what the panel just said, a lot of VR at that point was single dosage VR. Most people had bought headsets, largely out of novelty, largely out of hype, and even if they bought it, it was bought for the one-off use case to learn a very specific thing in math or take a space simulation to go see the International Space Station, and then it was collecting dust on a shelf. And so a lot of our work at Inspirit today is really doing that not very sexy job of bringing those devices back online, of really trying to develop use cases that go beyond the one-off, once every 6 months, once every 2 weeks type of use case, but also being firmly rooted in this idea of DICE, which Jeremy talked about briefly in his keynote, this idea of all VR, at least what we believe in and what we subscribe to, should be DICE. It is trying to solve problems that are too dangerous, impossible, counterproductive, or very expensive to do in the real world. So we decided to really build that platform that could be a complete solution for everything from LMS integrations, classroom management, building the entire dashboard to enable teachers to use this, but really focusing very intensely on the pedagogy of, from a learning sciences perspective, of how do we actually onboard a teacher and center the teacher and give the teacher the agency to see this as a new tool that isn't competing with their space and their presence in the classroom, but actually helps amplify the existing work that they are trying to do in so many different ways. So designing the models for the very first time for how do you run a classroom session when you have 5 headsets and 25 students? What does that pedagogical model look like, which is the reality for 99% of schools today that have VR headsets? What does it look like when you start the class and 3 of your headsets are not charged? What happens in that setup? What happens if it rained the previous day and because of some damp moisture, 2 of your headsets are now spoiled? How do you ensure if one hand controller doesn't have battery in it, what happens then? So building workarounds, building the moves for how do you build a station rotation model, how do you drive outcomes that were designed to be driven to begin with, and then how do you build diverse use cases so that every single week of the entire school year there is a VR lesson and that it builds upon itself and it creates a progressive activity structure over the course of a school grade level and over the course of many grade levels. I'm lucky to be working with thousands of teachers today. Again, small part of a very big team and a very big movement here. I just want to wrap up with a couple of things I'd like to throw out there. If any of you is a researcher or an entrepreneur or a content creator, I would love to find ways to give access to our network of schools and districts. We work with about 100 public school districts in the country of all shapes and sizes, from districts like Miami-Dade Public Schools to districts in Alaska. If there's opportunities to collaborate on research, I'd love to learn from you to understand the types of research questions you are asking today on VR and learning specifically, as well as different ways in which we can build or embed your pedagogy, your work, your content, your resources into these classrooms. I'd be very thrilled to collaborate. And then from my end, in terms of asks, I'm always looking for people building content. A lot of our schools desperately want more content, as Matt and a few others mentioned as well. The breadth is really what they're looking for today, going into new areas like the social sciences, languages, and beyond. Would love to brainstorm and collaborate if you have new areas of content you'd like to work in. And also, hardware and devices. We have a lot of schools that desperately want devices, even if it's the one generation older, old school device, it still delivers very powerful outcomes, and we'll have to find ways to collaborate there as well. That's my time, and thanks so much.